All right, welcome back, everybody. We are going to get going here on the second half. We want to introduce now Frederick Riley, who runs Weave, the Social Fabric Project, the project that David Brooks founded at the Aspen Institute in Washington, D.C. The Weave Project tackles the broken social trust that has left Americans divided, isolated, and lonely, as we've been discussing. Frederick hails from Saginaw, Michigan. He grew up in a tough neighborhood where he didn't have a lot, but he did have a community. People showed up for each other, and he benefited from their love and support. To pay it forward, he spent 16 years at various levels of the YMCA organization all around the country, building programs that gave youth a sense of value, sense of belonging, while helping them prepare for life beyond high school. Fred has nurtured community wherever he's lived: Atlanta, St. Louis, Chicago, Cincinnati, and now here in D.C. As Weave's executive director, he supports people across the country who are showing up to heal our nation's divides, starting right where they live. Let's welcome Frederick.
So good morning. It's good morning. I grew up in a Black Baptist church, and so when you say things, it's call and response. So I just want to make sure you all are ready for that, okay? And I do well with oohs and ahs and amens, and so if I say something you like, I want you to do that. Yeah, see, perfect. See, you're already catching on. So I had a real long talk prepared, but David I think he must have come to my last gig and copied my notes, and so he's given half of it. Denise did as well. So I'm gonna hit a couple of key points, and then I'm gonna open it up so you can hear from some of the really important people, some weavers that we have with us today. But I should pull out my phone. I think I left it on the table to take a picture of the group so I can show my mother that about 300 plus people got out of their beds this morning to hear from me. You all are really good liars. I know you came out to see David this morning. His nickname in our group is the Beyonce of weaving, because David can pack out a house, but just like Beyonce, he is really passionate about the work that we do at Weave, but more importantly, passionate about the weavers in the communities all around our country. You know, when David founded Weave, he founded Weave because he was writing about a lot of doom and gloom. And I don't know how I would be sane if I was writing about doom and gloom every week, right? Because he writes for multiple publications and he writes books, but he's writing about doom and gloom. But he came to the Institute and said, I'd like to do something about the doom and gloom that I'm writing about all around the country. And so when Weave was founded, we went on a tour around the country, and we would do four things. We hired some researchers, and we would call into a community, and we'd ask a couple of questions. Who do you trust? Who shows up for people, and who is the leader in your community? And we would hear the same people. We would go in and host a dinner, and we would sit at the table and host a dinner, and these folks sitting around the tables, you know, I know there are a lot of elected officials here, but none of them would hold elected office. They would be a lady who just decided it was up to her to feed kids after school, so she started making sandwiches to make sure that kids had a meal before they went home. Or it's a person who ran a coffee shop who said, I have extra bagels at the end of the day that I was just throwing away, and I want to make sure the homeless folks get a meal. Or folks like the Sisters of Watts. These folks are just showing up because they saw a need. And we recognized pretty quickly that we had a groundswell of people who were quietly knitting together the social fabric of their community. And our role pretty explicitly had to be, how do we support them in this journey that they're on? I want you to think for a second about trust and how you come to trust things, right? You come to trust things in a bunch of different ways. Either somebody enters trust. I have a brother who spent 16 years in the Marines, and he came home with a 3-year-old daughter and his wife, and the 3-year-old was so afraid of me. And I'm like, it's my twin brother. How could you be afraid of me? This is my brother. And so my brother sat next to me and he hugged me. He goes, do you trust? This is my brother. You should love him too. And pretty soon she warmed up and she cuddled up next to me. And now I'm the favorite Uncle Poo Poo. But my brother had to broker that trust. And then trust is shown and trust is given. And so people in communities around the country are just showing up. And when people just show up, people begin to trust and they dial in. FEMA, we had a lot of stats today, and so I won't bore you with any of the stats, but FEMA says that neighborhoods and communities don't recover from natural disasters when people don't have trust. And when social cohesion is down. So I want you to think about it for a second. We had out a lot of stats, but I want to tell you some real human things, right? A tornado comes to your neighborhood. You and your neighbors in a 4-block radius don't talk to each other. You don't trust each other. You believe this person voted for Trump and I don't agree with them, and so I hate them. And then the tornado comes through and I'm outside banging on your door with a flashlight to give you some help. Do you open the door? You probably say yes right now, but in your sane mind, right in your house, you say no. And so neighborhoods don't recover when there's no trust. And so we have to figure out how do we pit people together on these humanistic things that we share versus these really asinine things that are different. Weave does a couple of things. Because we recognize that these weavers around the country are working on these really complex issues, and folks understand how to do this, we started an online resource, a hub, so we can connect weavers from Chicago to Albuquerque together. They share resources, they share stories, they pat each other on the back, but they also help to connect each other with resources. Connected to that is also a training hub, because we believe they should have facilitation skills. They should also know how to talk about their work, and they should also be able to give talks about it. So we connect them with tools and resources so they can do their job better. One of the really cool things that we've also done is we figured out that a lot of these people are doing this work for gratis, meaning they see a need, they decide to step in. And so they said to us in a study, we can't raise money. We don't have we can't complete sometimes the really complex narratives for a grant proposal. And I've completed 50-page proposal to get $25,000, and that's absurd. So if you're a funder in the room, I just want to tell you, you got to lower this a little bit for the people who are doing the really great work. So we started raising money to ensure that we could get cash in the hands of people who are doing the work in communities. It's a project called Weaver Awards. It's some of the coolest work I've seen happen around the country. I have a quick video I want to show about the work that we're doing in Baltimore and Wilkes and a couple other cities around the country.
America is really shaken up right now.
There's a lot of difficult challenges in our nation, and I don't want to be one of the people that just sit around the coffee shop and bitch about them.
There are so many different lenses from which we can look at the world and say we must do better.
I came to the United States when I was 6. I love this place. And I know it's going through really hard times, but I'm not giving up on it.
When societies lose trust, when communities lose trust, people are less likely to help their neighbor. But in communities all around the country, there are these people that are showing up for one another. We call them weavers, and they are really the bridge to solve this big social ill that we have.
A weaver is someone who is never kind of content with how things are. They're always looking to make things a little bit better or include a few more people.
How I get to be a weaver is by listening and earning trust to build relationship so that people could allow me into their lives.
I get to weave people with food, music, and art.
I've had more than 14,000 to my own home for dinner in the last 13 years.
We now have a way to invest directly in these grassroots leaders. It's called the Weaver Awards. The people who are doing the work are the people who sometimes get overlooked, folks who don't get an opportunity to apply for a grant to the big organizations. And so our role at Weave is to really figure out how we can lend a hand to make the work that you're doing bigger, better, and more important in the community.
To really know that this community loved me enough to give enough words to Weaver, that they in turn felt that I deserved the award, was the greatest thanks that I could receive for the work that I do.
At M&T, we've consistently worked with our communities, and what I love about the Weave program and our team loves about Weave, it was an opportunity for us to bring our efforts to the next level.
When I got to speak to the M&T team and hear their mission and hear their why and what they're trying to do with the community, I was for it. And now it's like when I drive past M&T Bank, any M&T Bank, I get a different feeling of what that bank stands for and what they're trying to do in the community.
You don't have to be a formed nonprofit organization to apply. You can simply run a community garden or read to kids after school. The application is really simple to complete, takes about 20 minutes, and what's really cool about this is that the community members choose the awardees.
Today, we are hosting our first salon talk. This whole event is for our young ladies to really have a space for themselves, to be them, to build sisterhood. For a very long time, when you're walking through society feeling invisible and you start to be seen, it's the best feeling ever. So thanks to Weave for making me feel seen.
What we're offering is an opportunity to rethink how you fund it in a way that's really supportive of people working in communities, corral them together, and then watch the results as they happen.
I think every person right now is tasked with answering what does it mean for our country to weave, to come together.
Let's do all the other things that we're doing, but let's also invest in these local folks who are doing the work in communities who can teach us how to trust again. So not only do we connect them, we support them, we also lift them up in their communities. And so one of our final strategies is like, how do we create this new culture of a different type of volunteering? I think when people think of volunteering, you think of being on an assembly line at a food center and you are putting mashed potatoes on a plate. But we think that weaving opportunities really build out the mutuality of the folks receiving the aid and the folks delivering the aid. And so we launched the Weaver Network last year with the Points of Light Institute. They had about 50,000 volunteer opportunities around the country. We layered a lens on top to figure out which ones are in neighborhoods, they're relational, and there's a mutuality. So we have about 9,000 different opportunities from coast to coast. And so there'll be an opportunity later for you to register if you have a weaving project in your community to get other folks connected to it as well, because we recognize not everybody is gonna form their own community project. We also launched a speakers bureau because we believe that you should not be hearing from me on this stage. You should be hearing from the people who are actually doing the work in communities. I work in an ivory tower, and I think it's important for people to hear the story from the people who are actually on the ground doing the work. You'll get a chance to do that in just a little bit. And so we launched a speakers bureau where we train our weavers, we pitch them, and we have placed them on stages like South by Southwest and the Aspen Ideas Festival. We make sure that people are hearing the stories of what's happening in neighborhoods in a different way to connect with people in community. Now, I know you're probably thinking, people working on the ground in communities, supporting each other is not going to build trust. It's not going to do anything different than it's already done. But I want you to know that this isn't a new concept in this country. Our country has always found a way to come together when times are tough, and times are super tough right now. If you've read the paper or watched the news or heard some of the sobering stats we heard earlier, but I want to take you back. I'm a studier of history. I love history. It's something that once I find out something, I go on a rabbit hole and I want to find out all the details on it, right? Winston Churchill's grandmother, I have a story to tell you about her, David, later. But if you think back to after World War II, it was weavers in communities all around the country who taught English to new Americans when they found a new home here on our shores after World War II. It was those same volunteers inside of YMCAs and Red Cross buildings who helped families on the grief journey when they found out a young man was not coming home from the war. And it was those same people who helped to find jobs for them when they came back home. Our country, our people, our neighborhoods have always found a way to connect during times of strife and when things are rough, and we can do this again. We can inspire us to start weaving all over again. We're going through an election right now, if you all haven't heard, right? Where some folks running for president, and no matter who you're voting for, right? No matter who you're voting for, I don't really care who you're voting for, but I do know that they by themselves cannot knit our country back together again. It's going to take each and every one of us. In 1933, when FDR became president, he was hit with the federal banking crisis. And so his first week in office, he enacted some laws, bullied them through Congress. They saved banks. He got on the radio and he says, can you, American people, put your money back in the banks? Trust me. The next day, $20 million showed up in U.S. banks. In today's numbers, that's about $500 million. I don't know if we have a leader right now who can do that, maybe some of the elected officials here, but I do know Shorty in a Baltimore neighborhood who can tell folks to go do something and they come, or LB down in Wilkes. These weavers are the neighborhood FDRs who are connecting a community together stitch by stitch, and we've just decided that our role at Weave is to support them on their journey. And so I'd like to pivot and invite on the stage, David, if you'll join me again, I'd like to invite Jim Peterson and Maggie and Anthony on the stage, because I'd like for you to hear from some of our weavers about the work that they're doing in communities and why it's important to support the people who are actually doing the work on the ground. So if you do me a hand and give them a warm applause and welcome them to the stage. So I'll jump in and I'll say, David, I'll start with you, just because, before we get to the weavers, David, what's happening here? You've been traveling around the country talking about your new book, How to Get to Know a Person. This is essentially a book about how to be a weaver, how to weave authentic relationships. We're in a presidential year where tensions are high already. How are folks receiving your message around the country?
Yeah, I would say first, my book came out in October. So when October 7th happened, I thought, well, that'll just bury the book because we're in a world of global strife. People are having incredible conflicts in this country over that, and let alone over the election. And so I thought, well, there'll be just no audience. And sure enough, most of the media that I had scheduled canceled. And yet when I went out and started talking to folks about the book, I got a response that was about 10 times greater than any of my previous books. It turns out people were just hungry for any way to heal strife. People were just so exhausted and bitter, and they just wanted some way forward. And there was one, when you're on a book tour, you spend a lot of time, you would call it sad guy alone at a hotel bar, but I call it reporting. And so I'm at a hotel bar somewhere, and I'm going through Twitter, and I'm scrolling through all the horrible images, and I come across an image, an interview James Baldwin gave probably in the 1960s. And he says, there's not as much humanity in the world as you would think, but there's enough. There's more than you might imagine. That the world is held together, he says, by the love of relatively few people. And what you have to remember as you walk down the street and you see somebody, you have to remember that person could be you. That saint could be you, that monster could be you, and you have to decide. And so when I saw that video, Baldwin went through a lot of hardship in his life, but he refused to be dehumanized by it. And the phrase that leapt to my mind as I was watching that little Twitter video was a defiant humanist. And so I think we're called upon in a moment like this just to be like James Baldwin. Just to be a defiant humanist, not to give up on people, even though it may seem like some days that's what you want to do.
Thank you, David. Jim, yes. Thank you for joining us. And I won't read your entire bio, but you've been a business owner for a couple of decades. You've worked for the mayor's office, and you now serve as the vice president of small business ambassador for M&T Bank. And you worked with us as we founded Weaver Awards our first year, and you all have been helping to support us for the last 3 years. And what makes that part of M&T Bank, the community engagement part, so important? You're a large bank, and what makes this important?
Yeah, we are a large bank, but we are a regional bank. A lot of people forget that. Those in our footprint forget that we're a regional bank, but we operate as a large bank. But at the same time, at the heart of who we are is a community bank. And what that means is that, by definition, our decisions are made locally. Even though our headquarters is in Baltimore, our decisions on our lending and who we participate and partner with is made locally. You met Augie. Augie is who will make the decisions in the Baltimore area. And communities are everything to us. We build our business through relationships, and that's what drew me to working for M&T Bank. We understand that relationships are key, communities are key, and partnerships. When you guys approached us about partnering, it was a no-brainer because our missions align so greatly. This is what we do. We also understand that small businesses are a key part of every community. And we are the #1 SBA lender in the Mid-Atlantic because we understand how crucial that is. And when you think about small businesses, 99% of all the businesses in Maryland are small businesses. 49.5%, I'm sorry to give more data, but 49.5% of all the employees in the state of Maryland work for small businesses. Right? So they're crucial. We look at all these companies and we think they're either tiny or large, but they're all small businesses. Many of us in this room are working, if you're not working for the government, you're working for a small business more than likely. We understand how important that is, and we understand how important partnerships is in building these communities.
Now, you've been with us over the last 3 years, and I think, but you work on the side of essentially revenue side of M&T Bank, and you all have been extremely generous with us, but also a really partner, because we've thought through some really crucial details of this work. Why that? Because typically big groups like M&T Bank, even though you're a regional bank, give big checks to big groups and then walk away, but you've been a partner. But what's the impact you've seen of funding these local community weavers in Baltimore?
Yeah, well, again, it's how we operate. Every employee of M&T Bank is giving 40 paid volunteer hours so that they can go into their communities and participate in what's in their heart and what's important to them. So we lead with that. And I've seen some amazing things and some amazing individuals. I've enjoyed every minute of it. I come to the bank as a former business owner. I was a business owner for many years in Baltimore, as you stated, and when I transitioned out of my exciting industry of industrial flooring, I could have pretty much done anything. And in fact, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I was kicking around, and I became a SCORE mentor. What I realized is that for me, small business is the key to generating generational wealth for those individuals who come from in neighborhoods that I come from, right? Nobody's going to hand us anything. There were no endowments anywhere. There were no inheritances that I was looking forward to, and I realized that through hard work and a little bit of initiative, you can create wealth for your family, and I was able to do that, and I wanted to show other people how to do that. So around 2015, we had an incident in Baltimore called the Freddie Gray incident. Some of you may have heard of it, and Baltimore was in a real mess. And shortly thereafter, the mayor's office reached out to me and said, "Hey, Jim, we're going to create this position of somebody that needs to go into these communities and teach them about trust and equity. Trust and equity between the folks in the community and the business owners. Because what we realize is that if there's trust there, then you have less nonsense happening." And I was also my mission was also to help folks create businesses, because that's what I do. So I've been doing that for quite some time. I enjoy doing it, and somewhere along the way, after a few years, again, what M&T does, they reached out to me. Deidre Miller reached out to me and said, "Hey, Jim, I love what you're doing. M&T wants to be a part of this." So we partnered together, and we worked for several years in these communities, creating a now nationally recognized small business accelerator called 0 to 100. And we continued to partner for a few years, and then finally Augie and Deetra and the folks at M&T said, "Hey, why don't you just come work for us?" So now I work at M&T, still doing the same things in these communities every day, meeting some amazing people, and happy to be a part of the Weaver Awards program.
Thank you, Jim. Anthony is one of our most recent Weaver awardees in Baltimore. And Anthony founded a nonprofit called Evolving Minds to bring mental health to young adults in the workplace. Anthony, you started weaving in college at the University of Maryland because you were feeling disconnected. Right now, young people are at the top of the list of this disconnected group of people. It's one of the other crises we're facing right now. And so tell me about the challenges that brought you to this work and what you're doing with Evolving Minds right now.
Yeah. So you can feel my heart pounding in my chest.
It's fine, you're just talking to family.
The challenge for me as a young person was that many of my friends and young people are in crisis. And my story begins in crisis. Sophomore year as a student at the University of Maryland, I experienced a severe panic attack when I was driving around campus. And I became so overwhelmed in my body. I can feel this tingling, this vibration, this nervousness in my hands in this moment, but it was maximized in that moment by 1,000. And I just slammed on the brakes. I jumped out of the car, and I crumpled to the ground. And I felt like I was dying. I couldn't breathe. I was hyperventilating. And my friend, not knowing what to do, called 911, and the ambulance rushed me to the emergency room. I have so many stories that I could share with you all today, so many. And I know that each and every one of you in the audience have a story as well. My roommate was depressed at times and didn't leave his bed or his room. My childhood friend that I went to university with, he withdrew and never came back. I had a close friend that I co-founded our student organization with. We built it over 3 years. In their sophomore year, they contemplated taking their life in the dorm room. We were living and breathing this reality on campus, this crisis that no one was calling a crisis, right? It wasn't named yet as an epidemic, the youth mental health crisis. And our university wasn't providing adequate support at the time to support the vast need of students that were in crisis. So we launched a mental health advocacy campaign to raise awareness. We posted, and we launched it in the dead of night. And we posted thousands of flyers all over campus. And in bold red, the title was, "Terps are in crisis." And we had 3 bullet point statistics on the flyer. And we posted these everywhere, on the ground, on trees, on buildings. 1 in 3 Terps are too depressed to function. 1 in 3. Tens of thousands of students. 42% of students that withdrew from the university, the primary reason was mental health. And students were waiting 30 or more days to see a counselor at the counseling center. And we heard this again and again as we were building trust within our student community over many years, that they needed help, but they couldn't access it. And that ultimately launched our movement, hashtag 30 Days Too Late. The next day, the campus woke up, and we woke up our university. I'll never forget that day because we were tabling in the middle of campus to announce our campaign to the student body. And in all my years of grassroots organizing and tabling, no one likes tabling, and everyone avoids the table, right? We walk as far as we can around that table. I do it too. But on that day it was different. On that day, we had students coming up to our table all day, saying, "What can I do?" We had students literally running up to our table saying, "I saw your flyer, I heard about your campaign, I have a story too, how can I help?"
Wow. There's a growing theme with the weavers we meet around the country. They all see a need and jump in, and some of them are personally affected by it or driven, and because they're personally affected by it, they are driven to help solve for it. And so, Anthony, this past year, you were one of our now to date 70, we've hit a number of about 70 Weaver awardees around the country, and we've given away, not given away, we've supported in terms of Michael, my comms team is going to say, I can't say a number that's larger, but I would say almost $400,000 to these local groups around the country where we give a small seed funding for them to deepen the impact in their community. So what does it mean for you to be recognized as a Weaver awardee and to be funded to continue your work in Baltimore?
The recognition, I'll tell you the day I got the email, I was smiling. I was smiling so big. I was walking around my neighborhood and just, I had this huge smile. I felt deep validation and hope. I felt hope because it wasn't just me that was awarded, right? There's 19 other awardees. There's weavers, right? A community of weavers all over Baltimore and hundreds and thousands all over the country. And to be connected with that personally fills me with a deep meaning and purpose and belonging.
Yeah,
Can I
go
ask
ahead.
you a quick question? There's a thing at the University of Maryland that I've heard about called the Good Center. Do you know about
Do
this?
Good. The Do Good Institute, yep.
Were you involved with them?
So, funny story, we actually pitched our campaign at the Do Good Institute in front of an audience like this, 500 people, the university president, board of governors, at the Do Good Institute. So.
Okay, it's like as I understand it, it's like the voice for social entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And people vote and compete and try to, and I think it's what I know of it, I visited it once or twice. It's a great center to take students and help them, equip them to become social entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I also want to remind you, folks in the audience, that if you have questions, you should write them down on postcards that I think are on your table, and there are folks around here who will collect them. So if something is peeking up and there's something really interesting you want to share or get across, you should write it down. I forgot to say that earlier. Maggie, In the midst of law school at the University of Virginia, you found a rural town that felt like home, and you changed your career plans and stayed there. You saw a need and you dug in. And as the Deputy Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, that's a long title, you have a chance to weave at work. You didn't grow up in Culpeper, Virginia. What made you decide to weave there and stay there?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me today. I'm so thrilled to be up here on this panel. This is an honor. So I'm originally from Springfield, Virginia, which probably means something to everyone in this room. And I actually went to high school and college in DC. So like Jesus, I stayed within a 15-mile radius for the first 25 or so years of my life. And at that point, I went out to Charlottesville. I was at UVA, and I really was motivated in law school to make a difference. I wanted to contribute. And my third year, I ended up doing a clinic, which is essentially an internship, and I got placed in Culpeper, Virginia. And I literally emailed the organizers of the clinic, and I said, I think that you've made a mistake. I've never heard of Culpeper. I didn't even rank it on my top 10, and there were only 12 placements. And I really am not interested in going here. And they said, too bad, you're on your way. So I'll never forget the first day that I went. I was in court. I was in a suit. And a woman in a suit in some of these small communities really stands out to people. And I remember we went to a diner for lunch, and the two men that I was with ordered the regular. And I was like, I have been punked. Like, this is a movie set, and this isn't real. And I don't know if it was my age or my time in life, or if it was something special about that place in particular. But I do sort of feel like some of these small communities just serve you up a sense of place on a platter. When you're there, and especially when you're doing work within the community, you get to know so many of the community members. It's like being embedded on a block in a city. And because of that, and because of where I was, I felt like I could have this tremendous impact in this place. And I felt like I got to know it, and I felt like it gave me sort of a proverbial hug. It was a community that I was looking for. So I don't know if it was the right place at the right time, but I'm still there today.
So that's amazing. What was the need you saw in the community, and what made you think that you should be the person to dig in to help solve it? Definitely. So I'm a little different than a lot of other weavers in that, this is not, weaving is not my 9 to 5, it's my 5 after. And so that's an important thing to do though, so.
Thank you. But I remember this one day, I was a practicing attorney, and I was in juvenile domestic relations court, and I was prosecuting a family member assault and battery. It was a husband and wife. And I had spoken to the wife beforehand. She did not want to testify, and this is very commonplace, unfortunately, in our system. And I made her testify, and she cried, and her husband went to jail. And I walked out of court that day, and I felt terrible. I was like, I went into this job to do some good, and everything that came out of that room was bad. Every piece of it. I didn't win. No one was a winner in this scenario. I felt horrible. She felt horrible. Her husband's in jail. It just felt like there had been no good out of that scenario. So, in these small towns, I know someone earlier mentioned Walmart. I kind of had this fear that I was going to be walking around Walmart and people were going to point me out and say, that's the girl who put me in jail. And I didn't want that to be a salient fact about me. I wanted to contribute good to the community. And so I sort of looked at different organizations. There's not really soup kitchens or anything. These traditional concepts of volunteering don't exist in communities like this. And instead I found something called the Culpeper Literacy Council. And I reached out to them and I asked how I could help, and they said that I could teach English to new citizens. And I paused, and I don't have the patience to be a teacher. That's certainly why I went to law school. And math. I'm very bad at math. I think my microphone just cut off. Oh, okay. But anyway, so I asked maybe if instead, I could use some other expertise, things that I felt like I knew and I was good at, which was citizenship, the civics test. And they said that they had actually had this at their center years ago, but that I was welcome to bring it back. So I put a lot of time and effort and work into putting together this curriculum and setting up the schedule and reaching out to the learners. And in my first class, there was one learner, I'll call her Rhea, and she was from Jordan. And she was so diligent. I mean, we would meet every single week after class. We would go over all of the questions. I sort of developed all these different ways to remember different things, and she had flashcards and I would quiz her on them. And she passed the test. She took the test, she passed it. Now, there is this very special ceremony, a swearing-in ceremony that takes place every year on the 4th of July at Monticello. Wow. And they swear in approximately 100 new citizens. And they select them very carefully, actually. And because this is such an honor, they give every new citizen just 3 tickets of people that they can bring with them. And Rhea was selected to be sworn in as a citizen, and she invited me to be one of her guests. So I arrived at Monticello on the 4th of July at like 7 in the morning, and it was already, you know, a cool 98 degrees. And you're sitting on the lawn of Monticello, so you really are getting the sun. And she also brought her husband and her son. Her husband was a truck driver, and they had relocated to Culpeper recently. And it was the coolest experience. I mean, sitting there watching these people take the oath and seeing someone who I had this personal relationship do it, and we all got a photo afterwards. It's probably one of my favorite photos, but that moment was just so far beyond any success that I've had in the courtroom, and it stuck with me. And so I'm really proud of the work that I've done, and I would recommend it to anybody, but it's just a skill set that is completely different than anything that I do every day at work, and it's been a gift.
Wow. What it sounds like is that helps to sustain you at work by doing that as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I've never seen her in the courtroom.
Wow.
So.
That's wow. David, I'll pivot and I have a question for you. And so, you know, as you've been writing about the crisis that are happening, the multiple ones that are happening right now, everywhere I go, by the time we get done and try to head out the door, there's somebody who says, but what can I do? You know, I'll sign up for your newsletter. I want to do this, but how do I go outside of my back door and do something different? And so what kind of advice would you give folks, whether they are in rural Culpeper or Alexandria? What can they do to start to help to heal the divisions in their neighborhood or maybe in our country as a whole?
Yeah, one of my favorite books, I hope everybody's read this book, is called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And Frankl was a psychiatrist in Austria in the 30s who was sent to the Nazi death camps. And when he was sent there, he realized that the life he had planned was not the life he was going to end up living. And so he realized the wrong question to ask is, what's my passion? And what do I want from life? And the right question to ask is, what is life asking of me? So what problem has been thrown in my face that I'm qualified to answer? And so one of my favorite novelists is a guy named Frederick Buechner. And he says, your calling is where your deep gladness meets one of society's great needs. And so it's that mix between the one thing you're wired to do and one of the needs. And so when I talk to young college students, I always say, you're not going to find your calling at McKinsey, frankly. You're going to find it where there are problems. So go out to where the problems are. And I gave this advice to a young woman at UVA, and a couple of weeks later she calls me and said, yeah, I quit my job, I'm walking around DC looking for my problem. I'm like, don't take me that literally. Like,
found a lot, huh?
But I do think, and so I have a friend named Fred Swaniker, and he says, when you're out there looking for your problem, you have what he calls your moments of obligation, where you see a problem and you think, this is my moment of obligation. And he says you should turn down 90% of those moments. And he says, the way I think of it is I have 3 criteria for my moment, which is 1, it should be a big problem. That most of those people in this room, we've been well educated, we have talents, and so it should be a big problem. Second, it should be a problem that all your life has prepared you for. That's something in your background, what you're doing, your experience in Maryland, your life should have been prepared you, and it should be the kind of problem that keeps you up night. It shouldn't be something that's not part of your identity, intrinsically who you are. And so I'm about to tell you, so I gave you Fred's advice, I'm about to intimidate you by telling you what Fred has done with his life. So Fred grew up across Africa His mom had a school, and when he was starting at 16, he started teaching in the school. Came and studied in the United States, and he realized that my problem is that there's not enough opportunity in Africa. So he started a high school in Africa. He thought, I'm qualified to do education in Africa, called the African Leadership Academy, which is in South Africa, but gathers students from all across the continent. And then he said, we don't have enough universities, so I'm going to start 10 universities. Now, starting 10 universities seems like a kind of big endeavor. He's already started 7. He's raised, I don't know how many billions of dollars. They're in Mauritius, they're in Kenya, there's one in Nigeria, they're spreading out. And so that's a pretty audacious problem that he solved. So we're not going to all be Fred Swanekers. Wow. But he's sort of a model of pick the one problem that really calls upon you. And the one thing that your one magic trick. I mean, it's the final thing I'll say is, I found it really helps to define your gift narrowly. Like I talked about being a writer, but I'm not just any kind of writer. I have one magic trick. I can take lots of data and I can synthesize it into a story. That's my one magic trick. Unfortunately, AI is really good at that too. So. But so, you know, what's the thing when you're doing it, you feel most alive? And then how do you apply it to a problem?
I got nervous for a second. You said Fred, and then looked right in my eye, and I thought you were going to tell my story. And I was like, I haven't founded a school in Africa. But okay. So I have probably one more question for each of the panelists, and then we'll open it up to some of the questions from the audience. But, you know, Jim, speaking to those who are in businesses or big corporations, what's the role of business in building trust in local communities?
Oh, it's critical. As I mentioned, how important small businesses are. They're the foundation of every community, right? We depend on those businesses to support us and for employment and to take care of our communities, and that's why we're there. And I saw firsthand again when I was with the city, and they brought me in after a lot of chaos and mess had happened, and I had to go out and speak with these individuals, and it was very clear. You can stand at the top of a block and look down the block at the businesses, and you see, this one's torn up and that one's torn up, but they didn't touch this one. And then this one's torn up and that one's torn up, but they didn't touch this one, right? And as I spoke with these business owners, it was very clear that the business owners who had trust from those communities, they were untouched. Wow. Right? There was a clothing store right in the heart of everything in West Baltimore named Cashland Clothers, and the owner was John White. And I was talking to John, and he was like, yeah, I was here all night, and I ran down here, but nobody touched my store. I said, well, why do you think that is? He said, because they know me. They know me. He also had a shop in the mall, and the mall was ransacked, but they didn't touch his store, right? And it was very clear. There were a number of drugstores that were just ransacked and destroyed. But there was a woman in West Baltimore who owned a drugstore, and they didn't touch her store, right? Because she had that trust from the community, and when you build that trust, there's that respect, and it was my job. Excuse me. It continued to be my job to make sure that they all understand that the people in the community understand how important that is, the business owners understand how important that is, because that's going to build better communities and better cities and eventually a better world for all of us.
Wow. Thank you, Jim. Anthony, speaking of young people, what's the role of youth right now in building trust and cohesion in the communities where they live and work?
Yeah, so I'll actually be speaking to about 100 young people at the University of Maryland next Tuesday. And I'll share a little bit with you right now what I'm going to share with them. In the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, released the Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation Surgeon General Advisory, one of the most important reports that I've ever read in my life. And when you dive deep into the information, you see that from 2003 to 2020, there's been clear societal declines in social connection. But specifically when you look at young people, ages 15 to 24, time spent in person with friends has reduced by 70%. From 2003, 150 minutes per day on average, to 2020, 40 minutes per day on average. So what we do at Evolving Minds, and what I believe youth should be doing, is building social connection and community in their peer environments, and empowering and training youth to do that.
Wow. Thank you, Anthony. Maggie, what's the role of government in helping to heal our divides and building culture and belonging for all?
Sure. So, fundamentally, personally, I am a small government person, but I think that wherever you stand on the spectrum, undeniably, there are societal services that only government can provide. But sort of the dirty secret is that once you get into government, if you are in government, you probably had some degree of working politically on the other side. And, it's funny because when you think about the nature of politics and campaigns and the way that they work, is that both sides are doing exactly the same thing at the same time, right? They're actually doing the same work. I mean, they're buying ads, they're finding candidates, they're recruiting people, they're making contacts with voters. But within that work, the way that it's situated is basically to try to attack what the other side is doing, even though they are identical sides of the same coin. And so I think that's something that was mentioned earlier, which is that you have to find sort of this gem, and you also have to have respect. And I think that that's so essential, is that at the end of the day, whether you were in government or you were in politics, which are, basically two hands on the same body, you have to understand that the other side, or whoever you are working with, is trying to do exactly what you're trying to do. Their motives are good. They're trying to make a difference. They're trying to do something for their communities. And so if you come to the table with that baseline of respect, or if you're trying to fix any governmental problem, and you know that when you approach the table, you're always going to be better off.
Wow. Thank you, Maggie. So we got a bunch of questions from the audience here, and so I'll start with the first one, and anybody jump in as you see fit. So, how can we build trust in a society where we are categorized as individuals and pushed to be individuals?
I'll take that on. So this is a broad societal question. There's a book called The Upswing by Robert Putnam, who we've mentioned a few times, and a woman who worked on Weave. And the basic argument, they have a curve, and it's basically a bell curve. And it starts in the 1890s, when we were a very individualistic, kind of brutal society. And then things get better until about 1965, when we were a little more communal. And then things begin to decline. And these are trends relating to income inequality, racial justice, gender equity, political polarization, civic engagement, like all these trends which had to have nothing to do with each other. And yet they all follow the same curve. And so Putnam, who's the greatest political scientist in the country right now, says, he calls this curve the me, we, me curve. And we went from a society which was very individualistic, social Darwinism in the 1890s, and became a much more communal society. And people thought it was too communal. They wrote books called The Organization Man, how we're all a bunch of conformists. But then we became more individualistic, which was the rise of me. And so there's a thing called the narcissism test, where they ask people, do you agree with the following statements? And they're statements like, somebody should write a biography about me, or I like to look at my body, or I find it easy to manipulate people because I'm so extraordinary. And the median narcissism score has gone up by 30% over the last 20 years. And so just to take another example, American high school students rank 26th in the world in math. If you ask people, are you really good at math? We're number one in the world in thinking we're really good at math. And so this is just a shift from a more communal culture to a more individualistic culture. And this was a shift we had to make. In the 1950s, there were a lot of structures we just had to break apart. But we've sort of overdone it with the individualism and with the frankly, lack of humility. I'll just finish with one story. I was driving home, and WETA, our beloved PBS and NPR station, has a thing, used to have a thing on Sunday evenings, they may still have it, where they called the Big Broadcast, where they would broadcast old radio shows. And they broadcast something, a variety show that played an hour after the Americans won World War II on VJ Day, after the Japanese announced their surrender. And so I'm expecting them to be celebrating. The host of the show is Bing Crosby, and there are a bunch of stars. And Bing Crosby gets on there and he says, you know, we're just glad we got through it. We didn't win this because we're better than anybody else. We should just try to be humbled and be worthy of the peace. I was really struck by the tone of self-effacement. So I listen to them, I drive home, I go into my living room, I turn on TV, watch a football game, and a quarterback throws a pass and the defender tackles the guy after a 2-yard gain. And he does what all professional athletes does. He does a big celebration, victory dance in honor of himself. And it occurred to me I was watching a bigger celebration, self-aggrandizement after a 2-yard gain than I'd heard after winning World War II. And that to me symbolized a shift from a culture of self-effacement, I'm no better than anybody, but nobody's better than me, to a culture of look at my achievements. And I think we've sort of overdone it with the individualism. And I think a lot of what our organizations are trying to do is try to find a new and more fair way to do community.
Wow. Thank you, David. Anybody else have one way into that?
I'm just going to add to that just a quick line. I just also think that social media has exacerbated that problem, where you have every single person who feels the need to post about, you know, every time they go to Costco or they get a membership. And I just think that it makes us worse.
Yeah, I'm going to say quickly that as a grandfather now, you know, I just can't understand how my granddaughter sits on her iPad talking to her friends who are next door. They're all in their homes and they all live on the same block or in the same community, and they talk to each other through the iPad, and I just don't understand it. Something wrong there.
Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going on the technology theme, I was at a cafe in College Park about a year ago, and I went there to do work, and I pulled out my computer, but the Wi-Fi wasn't working, so I shut my laptop, and I started talking to the person next to me, the stranger. Can you believe that? I had a lengthy and long conversation with the person next to me, and we started talking, and I learned that they were a student at the University of Maryland. And about midway through, there was a long pause, and they looked at me, and I looked at them, and they said, I can't believe I'm about to tell you this. I mean, you're a stranger. This is a cafe. We're surrounded by people. It's noisy. But about 3 months ago, I attempted on my life. Wow. And the reason why I share this story in this moment is I think that we can build trust in each and every moment where we are, especially in cafes and grocery stores.
Wow. I tend to think that once we become less individuals, we find more of a home in the connectivity of others, and we find that we have way more in common than we have separate. And so I'm a huge proponent of that. I just think we do too many things alone. This next question says, what's the role of spirituality? And maybe they also mean church. What does it play in building trust? And I'll do the lead to that. You know, we are entering a period where less number of peoples are members of churches than they were before, and as they are declining in churches, they're also declining in places where you got a moral education, like YMCAs. You used to get a moral education in college or even in some high schools, and so we have less and less of the moral education. So what's the role can spiritual organizations play in building trust?
Well, for me personally, that's how it all started for me. I recall being a little kid playing in the street as we did in Philadelphia, and one of the church leaders, there was a church on the corner of our block, and they would come through and they would you know, just ask us, what do we need? You know, can we help you? And of course, as kids, we always said, well, we want candy and we want to play sports. So they helped us put together a baseball league. They did. We call them block parties, but they would block off the street and show movies and things like that. And after school, we could go there and get a meal and study. And they were just there for us. And that started it all. You know, as I got older, I always remembered that and just knew that, you know, somebody did that for me, and I'm obligated to do it for others. So that's where it started for me.
Yeah, I would just say the decline of church attendance has been a social catastrophe. And I say that I'm a person of faith, but I don't necessarily think people of faith are better humans than others, which is a mystery to me because we talk about being good all the time, but we don't necessarily behave better than other people. So I don't think it's necessarily the religiosity. I think it's the congregation. It's being part of a place where you go every week. And it's also part of a congregation and being part of a tradition which knows a lot about human nature. And so if you have a lot of friends and you lose a child or a spouse, your friends may show up for you. But if you're part of a congregation, the church knows exactly what to do. Mm-hmm. And the church has a lot of wisdom, or a synagogue. So if you lost your spouse of 50 years, it's not obvious that the thing you should do for the next week is host people at your home or go to a party every night. And yet the Jewish Shiva ritual, where you're really either hosting or going to a community gathering every night, is a brilliant act of human psychology, because it gives the grieving person something to do, like cut up casseroles, and it surrounds them with people every night. And the rule at a Shiva is you can talk about the dead or not talk about the dead, it's up to you. But it's just that art of showing up and then doing practical things. I have a friend who lost one daughter and almost lost another in different accidents. And I was asking her about the way people showed up for her. And she said, "You want to know the best thing that happened since I've been nursing my other daughter who recovered? Was that somebody came to our house and helped to feed us and brought us some food. And then they went to the bathroom and they noticed we didn't have a shower mat in the bathroom. So they rode out to Target, they bought a shower mat and they put it in the bathroom. They didn't even mention it. They just did this thing. And it was exactly the kind of practical help I needed at that moment. That was the best way they could have possibly have shown up for me for that moment. And just an organized system of mutual support that congregations have, the loss of that has just been very harsh. So I want you all to convert to some religion. Now, I should say that my love is doing what Fred and I do together, but my day job is being a journalist. And what I do is I occasionally get government officials to talk to me, and I interview them. And unfortunately, a government official who I've been trying to reach is available at noon back in DC. So I'm gonna have to leave a little early. So I apologize for that. But
just like Beyonce always gotta make it.
But I've been moved by what you all said, and Fred, it's often a pleasure to be with you.
So maybe just a couple of more questions from the audience, and one of these is for Anthony. And so Anthony, the question is, to what extent, what mental health challenges are still hidden at colleges and high schools? And that's a really good question, because I'm almost assuming that a lot of folks in here have young people and are shepherding young people on their journey. It's important.
What mental health challenges are hidden?
Yeah.
All right, I'll talk about technology. I involved with another organization, and we do week-long silent meditation retreats for teens and young adults during the summer. And we build up a lot of relationships and trust with these young adults. And through the course of the week, we had continued to build a deeper sense of bond between each other. And so at the last night, I had a young adult sit next to me. Outside, we were just looking at the stars, and there was a dance party going on inside. And at that point, they did open up to me and say, "Can I tell you a secret?" And I'm like, "Uh-oh, I know where this might go." But what they told me, and I think is really important, is they were telling me about a story about how at 12 years old, they were on Discord and counseling another young person in Europe who was suicidal. And so I think one thing that's really hidden in the mental health landscape and maybe isn't talked about as much is the technology, the impact of technology on young people. And I'll speak just briefly about my personal experience. I had to delete all of my social media in college because it was harming my mental health and well-being. And when I was young, around like 13, I would play video games 8 to 12 hours a day for years. And I didn't really realize that was a problem until much later. So technology, I'll just name it, is definitely a hidden crisis that I think a lot of young people are facing.
Thank you, Anthony. One last question to each of you on the panel, and popcorn in as you will. There's some folks out here who want advice on how to start weaving or how to support people who are weaving in community. So what advice would you have for them to get started or how to support?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, something that I think David mentioned was this, that everyone has a magic trick, right? And I think that a lot of people, especially today in 2024, aren't necessarily using that magic trick at work for 40 hours a week. Maybe it comes up a couple of times, or maybe you're in a field where it doesn't really come up at all. And I don't think that you actually have to use your magic trick as a part of your career. But if you're not using it, I think that everyone has an opportunity to use it in another way. Use it on a weekend, use it in the evening. Find a place, and it doesn't have to be one that already exists. You can create a space in which this skill that you have can be used to serve people. And I think that that's my Weave advice for today.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. Kind of where I'm going. When you take inventory of the skills that you have, you can find, you don't have to create everything. The same thing I tell business owners, people who say, I want to own a business. I say, all right, well, let's look at some businesses. Maybe you can buy one, right? You don't always have to start something, right? There's plenty of organizations out here that are doing some great things, so volunteer. I started volunteering, as I mentioned, after being in the floor business, I started volunteering for SCORE. SCORE is an organization of retired executives. Right, and through that, I was utilizing my skills as someone who was a business owner and knew how to start and grow businesses, and I was teaching other folks how to do the same, and I got the job with the city, right, because they realized this was a skill of mine. I didn't envision this, growing up. I didn't envision owning a flooring company. Right. I didn't envision working for a bank. I didn't envision working in the communities that I'm working in. In fact, when I first started with SCORE, it was in Howard County. It was a county outside of Baltimore. But as I started working with individuals, while being there, they kept saying, well, our Baltimore office is understaffed. You think you can go to Baltimore? And that's how it started. And when I went to Baltimore, I felt right at home and made my home in Baltimore. So my suggestion is just take inventory, understand what you're good at, and then find somebody else to help. And you'll find your problem by helping somebody else with theirs.
Thank you, Jim. Anthony?
I'll share my favorite community building technique with you all. And you can implement this tonight or tomorrow in your families or your workplaces or wherever you gather as human beings. So you'll sit in a circle and you'll use a connection question like, what are you grateful for? Or what brings you joy? Or where do you see the goodness in the world? And with those humans in the space, you'll invite them to connect around that question for 20 minutes. So set a timer for 20 minutes. And then for that entire time, you're just connecting around that one question. Now, to ease the flow of conversation, you can throw around a pillow or a stress ball or an imaginary ball. And I guarantee you that this will increase a sense of empathy and connectedness in that group. And if it doesn't, let me know, because I've never seen it not work before.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. If you all will give a round of applause to this expert panel. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your skills and just a passion for how you weave together communities all over the DMV. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Listen, we are living in a really challenging time right now, and these issues seem to be so big, they're like a mountain that we all don't seem to be able to push over. But in the midst of that, I still have a lot of hope. Thank you for still populating the word cloud. I still have a lot of hope. And I have a lot of hope because of the weavers I meet around the country. And these people are like Mrs. Smith, my 5th grade teacher, who thought I was brilliant and told me I was going to be the president of the United States one day. And so when I was leaving her 5th grade class, she paid the $75 and drove me to the test so that I could be placed in the Gifted and Talented program. I will never forget Mrs. Sharon Smith. And then my high school English teacher, Mrs. Floyd, who knew for me that college wasn't just a rite of passage like kids from higher income zip codes. She knew it was going to be pivotal in how I saw and impacted the world. And so when I was away in college in Atlanta, she would squirrel away $50 in a letter that she would send to me to make sure I stayed on course. I'll never forget Mrs. Floyd. And my pastor as a kid, Dr. Reverend Roosevelt Austin, who was a giant of men, and he was probably the most important person I'd ever met. And when I was a kid, I would stand by the door outside of his study as a junior usher, just waiting to get a glimpse or him to put his hand on my head to say, "My son, you are important and you're somebody." I'll never forget Reverend Austin. I'll never forget the people who helped to knit together my life and set me on the track to where I am now. And there are people in your community here who are doing some of those very things, big and small. And so I'd like for you to think about, how do you support them? How do we impact their work? How do we inspire others to join in? There's a slide that we're going to put up for Weave. We're here to support this in Northern Virginia if you're interested. So you can subscribe to our newsletter. There's a QR code that'll come up. You can join our online community of weavers. You can put your organization inside our Weaver network. You can invite some weavers to our community, to your community from our Speakers Bureau. Or if you're interested in Weaver Awards, we can have a conversation about that as well. You know, the crisis that we're in right now in our nation is being solved in communities. It's being solved here, but they're silent. Nobody knows who they are, and we'd like to help to amplify the work that they're doing. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you today. And I have the privilege of shutting up, but also inviting onto the stage the new president and CEO of the Community Foundation of Northern Virginia, Miss Renee Yancey.
Everyone, thank you so much for being here. And Frederick, I love the call. Yes, I love the call and response tradition that you reference. I come from the exact opposite tradition, but I want to keep it going. I'm Episcopalian, and we are super quiet. But for a moment, I'm going to pretend that we can have this call and response moment. Thank you, right on cue. So, this time next Friday, are you available? Come join us again. Just kidding, but we really want to continue the conversation. So I'm 2 weeks into my new role, and yes, as many have asked, thank you. I am drinking from what feels like the equivalent of the Niagara Falls, but the water is delicious and refreshing, and I thank you so, so much. I have really big shoes to fill. I know Eileen wanted to be with us today. She had a quick change in schedule, so if you see me sloshing around in shoes that are big, it's because she left them for me, and I want to thank her personally as I have individually. So I'm going to be brief because the brain can only endure what the posterior can bear, and I know you've been very generous with us with your time. And two of the most important words in speech writing are in conclusion. Everyone kind of perks up. So today was really built on love, and I want to offer some thanks and love to those who've been part of this, those who are in the room, those virtually, and those who have been engaged in the thinking and the dreaming and the ideating about creating today. So our hosts, thank you to George Mason University, the Costello College of Business for hosting us, all of the educators and leaders and problem solvers who are coming right through these doors right now, right beyond us in classrooms and lecture halls. So leaders who are going to be our problem solvers now and into the future. Thank you to the Aspen Institute, the Weave Social Fabric Project, our colleagues, in particular Frederick, Maggie, James, and Anthony for sharing your thoughts, your expertise, your experiences, all of our panelists, to David Brooks, who had to transition out, for reintroducing us to these deeper concepts of social trust and giving us a path to strengthen trust here in Northern Virginia. Thank you, Drew. 3 years in a row. Mark your calendar for next year. We're so grateful to have you. To Denise Bellows, our Senior Director of the Insight Region, for your presentation. To my team, my new team at CF Nova, they have led with head and heart to make this event possible. Tara, in particular, I'm calling you out behind the production desk, and Alex, the stellar team, along with all of our CF Nova colleagues. To our 19 presenting sponsors and partners, a community foundation does not work in a silo, and it is through partners and help with each of you right by our side that we're helping to make this community stronger. Again, to our program sponsors, and we have members of our board of directors who are here, so if you wouldn't mind just indulging me for a moment, if you're able to stand or wave your hand so that the community knows who you are, the members of the board of directors. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for being here. And these are generous folks. They just met with for a board meeting yesterday, so I know that you've spent tremendous time with us. So folks, that's it. It's a wrap. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
It seemed to be obvious that any development should have its functional facets, but it also should have a fun, beauty, fantasy.
There's sculpture that's sophisticated for adults. There's sculpture that's playthings for children. And there are sculptures for different tastes, and yet they all belong, and they all have a place. They're all fixed in situ in the environment.
Modern sculpture tended to be misunderstood. We felt that if we could take sculpture and make it useful and engaging, and especially make pieces of sculpture that had another role to play, aside from being sculpture, we might succeed in making people love it more.
Reston is a very unique place. It has a really great tradition of public art and an approach to public art that was really ahead of its time in terms of integrating art and urban design and architecture and having the artists work really collaboratively on the design of public spaces.
It isn't that we had a piece of architecture built or someone did, and then we went out and bought art, to decorate it. Not that at all. We, the designers of the buildings and the builders of the place, together worked out the sculpture and the art, so that the sculpture and the art are very integral to the form of the buildings and the materials and to the concept of the whole thing. When it came time to think about the idea of let's have some sculpture, Gonzalo Fonseca was an obvious choice. He had worked for me before. He also knew Rosant. And so we were all kind of part of a family and friends,
My father did this portrait of me during the time he was doing Reston. And so while he was doing these monumental projects, he found time to do this portrait. Father was born in Montevideo, Uruguay. He did attend 2 years of architectural school. Then he met Joaquin Torres Garcia, who was that great modernist, painter, thinker. He began experimenting with all kinds of sculpture, influenced by architecture, history of architecture, antiquity of all kinds, plus his modernist constructivist training. I think Reston may or may not be the first instance, but it certainly is the most important instance of his kind of breaking into his own idiom. His work certainly was the result of so much digestion of great art together through the prism of his own understanding of modernism and his own incredible imagination. My father used to say that his work involves serious play. They're spontaneous and they're things to discover, hidden things, just the sort of thing that children love. Father was almost oblivious to the art world and yet supported himself, and his goal was to make the minimal, to keep going. Just before he died, he said, a lot of people want fame and fortune, I want time. It's the kind of man he was, the kind of artist he was.
Gonzalo Fonseca and my dad would go out to the beach, both in Italy and in Long Island, and they would do sand sculptures. And we had, little trowels and things. And these aren't like sand sculptures that kids make. These were pyramids. These were incredible creations, and they'd compete on the sand and do beautiful little steps that would circle a building. And when we, as kids, would go to Lake Anne after it opened, after it started, and see the sculptures, it was like walking into life-size sand sculptures. They were out of our imaginations of what my father and Gonzalo had built on the sand.
The fountain in the center of the plaza is designed as a play fountain in a way, so that kids of all ages really would not think of these things as sculpture primarily, but appeal to them more as something they played with and that made fun with water.
It's a fun sculpture, and it makes the plaza full of laughter. Public art was essential in creating a public space. The shape of the plaza brings people to walk around it. The fountain invites kids to play. It's magical how it coalesces the whole plaza.
Between Rosat and Fonseca, we really got public art where we wanted it. Community is what it's all about. Community is the interaction of people. That's my definition of community. I don't know if anybody else likes that definition, but I think it is. Community is interaction, and plazas are designed to foster interaction.
To create Reston Town Center, we knew we wanted something different. It's not very often you have the ability to put in the center of a city, in essence. We had to do something that was very special and that attracted people's attention right away. We knew within the first few months of our planning back in '81 that a fountain was essential.
In 1989, I was proposed for a competition to make a fountain. They have few artists who proposed, and I made my proposal, which was very extravagant and very expensive also. But they went for it, and it was one of the greatest adventures. I made this precise model for the fountain, and I brought it to Italy. It took several months for them to carve that piece.
The bowl was done in one piece, and then the spiral was done in two pieces. And then it was all put together on site.
When I'm asked to intervene in a space and create something new for the space, what I want to bring to that space is what I would like to find myself in a space. It is a surprise. I would like people to come around the corner and say, what is this? Wow. It was a community involved with in commerce, communication, so there's a god for that. That's Mercury. So I decided to make the Mercury fountain. But this Mercury I made is not stable at all. I hired this model. He was like this, and I had to put pieces of wood attached to his arms and to his body for him to be in the exact position I wanted, you know. The economic situation was not good. He was trying to find his balance, you know. Mercury was unsure. There's a great feeling about fountains. A fountain is a source of life. It's water. I like the idea of public art that's human, closer to what human beings really like.
I think that was the key thing, doing that fountain. It gives you a sense of place and makes you feel good.
Public art is a major aspect of placemaking. It lends distinction, identity, that sort of, I don't know why it's great, but it feels kind of different and cool to be here. So I think public art can offer all of that to a place.
Any evening, probably 10 months out of the year, where you sit at Mercury Fountain, the fountain's there, you see people gathered around it, talking, kids playing, and they may be engaged with the piece of public art and they're aware of it, but everybody in that space is feeling it. And that, to me, is one of the most wonderful things that comes with public art, the spirit of community that comes alive in a place like that. I began to think about public art in Reston, and the founding principles talk about art and beauty in our public environment. But to make sure that that continued, I began to pull the community together to do this.
Reston is very unique to have one singular advocate and visionary leading their public art program to continue on the tails of the successful work of Fonseca many years ago and to look differently at what would public art in Reston look like now in the 21st century. And I think they're off to a great start.
I was attracted to mosaics because of the solidity of the material. There's something about the sense, even though it's elusive, of the permanency of mosaic. If I had my druthers, I'd spend my life mosaicing empty walls on highways and freeways and underpasses.
So all of you are going to make little stars that I'm going to place throughout the big mosaic.
Valerie Thaberge and her husband, they engaged the school, they engaged kids. The kids actually participated in designing the art along with Valerie. What more can you say about Reston? than engaging our kids.
That's a key component of what IPAR is doing with public art, is creating ways for people to have a meaningful connection to the art making process and to learn.
We wanted energetic colors and colors that kind of represented colors on a flower, so we chose green, yellow, and orange.
We're going to do like a green rectangle. Okay. Smaller ones, and fill the rest in with red. Okay.
Well, the stars that the kids made were great, and it just shows you how unique and precious every child is, because each star was unique and precious. When the kids saw their work up on the wall, I mean, it was just the sense of ownership was very powerful, and the enthusiasm that they were part of this bigger project.
It feels really good. I feel like I've been a real part of something.
I have to agree with Noah. It feels like we really helped contribute to this.
When people approach the mosaic, I hope that they are energized and feel the sense of the power of life.
My hope for public art moving forward in Reston is that developers and members of the community continue to embrace beauty in public spaces and in our natural environments as we evolve over time to come.
I have often asked, what's the point of public art? What's the point? Well, what's the point of anything that's fun? To the extent that we can increase the pleasurable experience of living for other people, we've done something that's really very nice, very, very good.